Okay, so let's talk about something you've probably noticed. It feels like everyone is a little more checked out, right? Especially with students. There's this growing sense that attention spans are just gone. Today, we're going to dig into why that's happening, and trust me, the answer is way more interesting than you think.
It really kicks off with a frustration that feels super familiar. You see posts like this all the time. An educator is venting about students who seem completely disinterested, who can't seem to think through a problem without just grabbing the first answer Google gives them. It's a complaint that hits home for a lot of people, but it also opens up this huge question of what's really behind it.
So that's the big question we're tackling. What is this phenomenon really? Is it just, a phase every generation goes through? Or is it something more intentional, like a form of resistance against the system they don't believe in? Or could it be a symptom of something much, much deeper happening just below the surface? All right, to get to the bottom of this, we've got to look past the easy answers. So let's start by unpacking some of the most common theories out there and see why they don't really give us the full picture. Okay, you hear this one a lot, the economic argument. The idea is that young people see a tough job market and a shaky economy and just decide to check out. Why bother playing a game that seems rigged? And look, economic anxiety is absolutely real, but blaming everything on that ignores a huge and maybe more immediate problem that's staring us right in the face. Then you've got the flip side, the resistance narrative. This one paints disengagement as this heroic act of rebellion. It's like, good for them, they're not buying into the propaganda. But what if it's not a conscious choice at all? What if it's less of a brave stand and more of an unconscious symptom, just an inevitable reaction to the world they're living in?
To really get what's happening, we need to go deeper. We need a three-part diagnosis that connects the dots between our tech, our schools, and our whole culture around work.
So we're going to break this down into three key forces. First up, the undeniable, all-powerful effect of our screens. Second, the messages, both obvious and hidden, that our education system sends. And third, the fallout from a culture that screams that every single thing you do has to be tied to making money.
The first piece of this puzzle is what we can call attention decay. Think of it as the slow-motion erosion of our ability to focus on anything that doesn't give us an instant jolt of reward. Our brains are literally being rewired by the constant little hits of dopamine we get from scrolling through an endless feed of short, flashy content.
And this chart really shows you what that means in practice. Watching a whole movie or, reading a book requires a ton of sustained attention. It's a heavy lift, cognitively speaking. But a 15-second clip, it asks for practically nothing from you. And when our brains get used to that easy, constant reward, the hard work of deep engagement starts to feel, kind of impossible and not even that appealing.
But here's the thing, this isn't just about our phones. The second major force here is the messaging coming from our schools, which, let's be honest, can often crush curiosity instead of encouraging it. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? When the reason you're given to learn something isn't about the joy of discovery, but about avoiding a bad job, it just poisons the whole well. Learning becomes a chore you have to get through, something motivated by fear instead of genuine passion. So by focusing on that kind of negative motivation, the system completely misses the chance to talk about the big stuff. It doesn't inspire kids to think about virtues or what it might mean to live a good life. And most importantly, it fails to just celebrate the idea that learning things is cool and valuable all by itself.
And that leads us right into the final piece of this whole puzzle. That relentless cultural drumbeat telling us that if you can't turn a passion or a skill into a career, then it's just a waste of time. It's basically worthless. You can see how this creates a vicious cycle. First, that career path you're supposed to want starts to look shaky or maybe just empty. So then, the motivation to learn for that career completely falls apart. And what's left? What fills that void? The easy, predictable, reliable dopamine hit you get from a screen, which asks for nothing and gives you a little jolt of pleasure right now.
Okay, so keeping all that in mind, the screens, the schools, the work culture, let's go back to that original idea of resistance and see how it looks now.
So on one side, you have this really romantic idea of a generation that's bravely standing up and rejecting a broken system. But on the other, you have a much more sobering reality, that maybe this isn't a choice at all, but a kind of social malaise. It's what happens when you have this deep internal conflict, this cognitive dissonance, between the world you were told to expect and the one you actually see.
This quote puts it so clearly. The tuning out, the disappearing into our screens, it's not some virtue we should be celebrating. It's an internalized symptom. It's the physical manifestation of an inner struggle between all these confusing messages and a really confusing reality.
And this all brings us to the final and maybe the most critical point in this whole thing.
understanding the real trap that we're all in.
See, the easy assumption is that we're watching a generation that finally figured it all out, that they've seen through the propaganda and are just refusing to play along. But the argument here is that that's not what's happening. Not really. In reality, it's a generation that still, on some level, fully believes in the promises of success and achievement. The difference is in how they process that belief when it smacks up against the reality of attention decay, uninspiring school, and a future that feels anything but certain. The core belief is there, the reaction to it is what's changed.
So here it is, the most crucial point of all. Retreating into an endless scroll isn't an act of defiance against the system. It isn't opting out. It is, in fact, one of the main ways we now participate in the system. And that right there is the central, mind-bending paradox we're all dealing with.
Which leaves us with one last massive question to chew on. If the act of tuning out is really just another way of tuning in to the very system you want to escape, then what would it actually take? And what would it even look like to genuinely break free?